Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. Now we are going to start studying the Unit 2 of International A-Level Edexcel IAL Economics. And for the first chapter, the subject is Introduction to the Measures of Economic Performance. Here's our contents. There are mainly three parts for this lesson. The first part is learning objective. We are going to introduce the whole chapter briefly. And the second part is micro and macroeconomics. What's the difference between them and some specific example in your daily life. And the third part is the national economic performance. Now we're going to the first part. So for the overview, the chapter is basically a brief introduction to the economic performance indicator. It's like a kind of, combined chapter of a lot of information that I will provide you with, but it only requires you to have some simple explanations. So this chapter is relatively easy and superficial. We will dig deeper in the following chapters. And for examination insights, it's actually an introduction chapter. Like, you will know a lot of topics. They are all the potential exam points. But for this chapter, content is not in depth. We are now going to the next part. So first, we are going to look at micro and macro. What's the definition of micro and macroeconomics? So for micro, the definition is the study of an individual markets within an economy. For example, when we're talking about an economy, maybe you can think about a lot of industries like education industry, food industry, manufacturing industry, a lot of them. When you're given the market a very specific definition, then it belongs to the microeconomics. For AS level, actually, we've already learned a lot of things about the microeconomics in our Unit 1 part. But now, for Unit 2, we are more focused on the macroeconomics, which has a definition that the study of the economy as a whole. So, how can we understand this definition? For instance, the whole country does some policies, macro policies of government. They need to, have some intervention, regulation about the whole market. It's not just one specific market. All these single markets go together and make up of the whole economy. And we're going to study about the whole economy, the entire one, or even the global one. We're not going to study very specific ones. Here's a thinking question. Is the housing a micro issue or macro issue? So actually, everything has two sides, right? So for housing is actually a very specific industry, right? So you might think about, it must be a micro issue. But in fact, if you're just focusing on the housing industry, yeah, indeed, it is a micro economy issue. For example, if you are focusing on some investigation about the workers in the housing industry, about their wage, about the price of the housing is going up or down, then of course, it belongs to the micro. But if we focus on some significance of the housing in the whole economy, then we can say that it's also vitally important in a macroeconomic perspective. For instance, as we all know that housing takes a large proportion of the income of people. Also, it's included in the basket of calculating CPI, which is a pretty important index when we are discussing about the living standard of people. And usually the housing price affects the whole price level of the country. It is super, super critical in macroeconomic, not just in the micro one. Okay, so now we're going to the third part. It's about the national economic performance. So for this part, we're going to discuss the national economic performance through 4 parts, which are economic growth, unemployment, inflation, and balance of payment. So for economic growth, first, we're going to know about its definition. It means that the rate of change of output. Everyone can understand this simple sentence, right? But when we already know about its definition, how can we measure this output? So now we're going to the measures. We usually use gross domestic product, which is GDP. Although we're pretty familiar with this concept, we still need to review it. GDP is actually a standard measure of the output of an economy. However, the economic growth is not always positive. There are some really bad situations when the economic growth is actually negative, and we called it recession. Yeah, as you can see for the 3, under the 3, there's a recession, the word. And it is noticeable that it required a negative economic growth over at least 2 consecutive quarters. And then let's look at unemployment. Still, we need to know about the definition of the unemployment. I know it sounds silly, right? But unemployment means a waste of scarce resources. And now actually, I kind of want to discuss a problem with you. What's the relationship of unemployment with economic growth? It's also a pretty silly question, because everyone knows that when the economic is growing, the unemployment rate is likely to be lower. But can you write out it pretty logically, which is an important skill in exam? So fast-growing economies tend to have low unemployment, actually, because more workers are needed to produce more goods and services. But on the other hand, the economic growth may be driven by advanced technologies such as artificial intelligence, just like us today. The job creation from AI may be less than the unemployed people caused by AI. So, it's not that kind of solid. The unemployment may even rise since the economic growth. This can be written as a evaluation factor during the exam. It depends on you and the question. Now we're going to look at inflation. We just need to know about the definition of inflation in this chapter. It means that the increase in average prices in an economy, which can also be written in the form that sustained rise in price level. You'd better write both during exam, because usually the examiner are pretty tricky and they're picky about your answer. So write as much as possible and try to write correctly with very specific, very formal words. Finally, we're going to the balance of payments. Still, the definition of it records economic transactions between the country and the rest of the world. Can you tell me what is the main component of balance of payment? Yeah, of course, current account, trading goods and services, primary and secondary income. But there are also some other parts, such as capital accounts, financial accounts, etc. But still, the main part, even for the current account, the most important part of balance of payments is that export and import for most of the country. And, when we are discussing about export and import, there are 2 very important parts to look at. The first thing is export revenue. The next thing is import expenditure. So when we call, there's a balance of trade surplus in an economy, which means the export is bigger than the import, vice versa.
That's the end of the class. If you have any questions, please DM me directly. See you next time. Bye!